Hello, Susan Corbett, custom machine quilter here. This is a quilt that will illustrate the concept of part custom, part overall quilting. This is a hand embroidered quilt a client of mine made for a child. So, of course, we start with the basics. Quilt the edges down. I ditch quilted between the outer border and the first frame. And we decided to customize the embroidery and the outer border and overall quilt the rest. As I was about to start stabilizing, the idea popped into my head, as it often does: quilt a circle around each one of those figures. And I really liked that idea, so I went with it. I usually like to quilt pairs of lines. A pair of lines is always a lot stronger than just one, but for some reason, this one seemed like one would be just the right thing to do, and I think it worked out well. So I wasn't going to quilt it very heavily because the client didn't want to spend a whole lot of money on it. So that drove one decision right there. So I got out my stack of circle acrylic rulers and found one that was just the right size. So I would quilt one circle, and then as long as I was in there, I did what I normally do with embroidery, which is to outline quilt all the embroidery. It makes it stand up and it features it and looks really good. Okay, then I filled in the big empty spaces inside of the circle with some medium-sized background fill designs that I thought would go pretty fast. I quilted leaves, some loop meanders, some lines that look like weeds or grass or brush. I did some horizontal ground meandering in some of those blocks. And not too heavily, not too big, not too little, paying attention to the scale there. I can't ever get the scale to size because, of course, in quilting we take all kinds of artistic license. And I did all of that freehand, almost all the outlining of the embroidery was freehand. I sew at a low rate of speed, but on those big broad lines, I find those the hardest ones to quilt, so that's where I find some kind of a ruler to help out with those parts. Now, some of the figures were pretty big, so I found, well, I always find some way to do some quilting in some really big figures. In this case, that would be the elephant and the hippo. It's, I feel, a huge mistake to quilt densely in one part of the quilt and then have big open areas with no quilting. The quilt will not wear well, for one thing. So a lot of the, well, about 3 of these figures I could fill in inside the animal with just some outlining of the embroidery. You know, that helps define some parts. But here I quilted a butterfly and some other little things in these big animals. And I think that's just enough. So finally, I was able to overall quilt the rest of it. And this went really fast, of course. So what I did was a combination of kind of a medium-sized meander with some loops, with some curls and some swirls and whatever I felt like to get me out of a corner, or just to, easily move to some other part, since these were really irregular shapes I was quilting in. So the last thing this quilt needed was to quilt that outer border. And the reason we chose to do that one a little bit differently is because the client went ahead and put these prairie points on before it was quilted. I tell clients all the time, save these kind of things for last, if at all possible. These points, beads, buttons, that kind of thing, it's just so much better if they're last, because I've broken so many things over the years. That pressure foot is not forgiving. And I didn't want to peel those back and pin them down and do some ornate design, so I just chose a freehand zigzag that just went around those points. It's not precise, but that wasn't the point. And you see how fast that goes. It was a good way to finish that off in a big hurry. So here's how that turned out. The client was really happy. She loved it, and I love it too.